Good morning and welcome, everybody. Thank you for registering and joining us for today's quarterly update from HotStats. I'm Jane Pendlebury. I'm the CEO of HOSPA, the Hospitality Professionals Association. It's Thursday, the 2nd of October. It's 10 a.m. And we're due to be chatting for around 30 to 40 minutes today with time for questions. So we should be finished well before 11 a.m. As always, please do ask questions throughout. There's a Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. And if there's not enough time to answer all the queries, we will get back to you afterwards. The webinar is being recorded and we're happy to share the link afterwards. And it will also be available on our website as usual later this week. I'm so pleased to welcome both Michael Grove from HotStats and Paul Nisbet from Valor Hospitality. I've worked alongside both of them for so long, so I'm delighted to have such a prestigious couple of industry experts with me here today. Could you both quickly introduce yourselves so that everyone else knows about your vast experience and what makes you both so well placed to talk about what's going on in the industry? Should we start with you, Mike?
Sure. So I'm Michael Grove. I'm the CEO of HotStats. Been here for 7 years now. I spend most of my time presenting at the major industry conferences, just delivering the good and bad news for the industry around the world. And then amongst all of that, then also we provide data services to operators, owners, and perimeter stakeholders of the industry for benchmarking profitability.
Perfect. Thank you. And we like that news to be good most of the time, if we possibly
Right.
can. Put a positive spin on it. It's tough at times, I know that. Paul, could you just say a few words about you and what you do?
Yeah, hi, I'm Paul Nisbet. I am CFO for Valor Hospitality Partners. We look after about 100 hotels throughout the world, from most of the brands and also white label resorts and lodges and safari lodges, etc. So we look after all different kinds of hospitality in different parts of the world and mainly work for investors and owners who want to run hotels or want to own hotels, but they want us to manage them for them as white label operators.
Perfect. So yes, two great experts here. Thank you both. We're going to start with the presentation of the facts and figures from HotStats. So I think Paul and I will probably just temporarily turn our cameras off so that you can concentrate on Mike and his stats. So we'll be back with you shortly, Mike. Over to you.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to try and make this sharp and, well, I say short and sweet, but it's not that sweet at the moment, as many of you will probably recognize. And then we can dive into a discussion with Paul then around, what's actually happening on the ground, certainly in his world. To begin with, so HotStats, as I kind of briefly touched on, we're collecting the P&L data from hotels all around the world, specifically in the UK. We've got, I think, close to 1,000 hotels working with us now. And so this data is based on the aggregated data of the market from quite a few P&Ls. So it's a pretty objective view of what's going on in the hotel industry. So I'm going to give you the facts and figures. As you can see here, recently a Duetto company as well. So we were acquired in April, if you're wondering why that is the case. Now, I'm not going to have been told I'm not allowed to pitch my two new products, so maybe I'll come back to that at a later stage. But as I've just come hot off the press presenting at, I'd say, the joint best hotel conference in the UK at the annual hotel conference this week, there was a real actual quite somber mood around the performance, but still fairly positive around where the UK sits from an investment standpoint. But if you look at the numbers, I started at Europe level here. So you can see, for instance, Eastern Europe has seen further success this year. So very much a growing region of Europe. So 11% increase in GOP par on the right-hand side there. Southern Europe, further growth around 4%. And then you can see Western Europe at 3%. And Northern Europe, which for our sample is mostly the UK and Ireland, it's around 3% down. So really out of sync with the rest of the continent. And I think if you look across this, you can see really where that's really highlighted. So UK currently sat third from bottom, as you can see there on the left-hand side. And although we talk a lot about the revenue position, so a lot of the discussion has been around softening rooms demand, challenges around food and beverage from a revenue perspective, the real challenge actually is amongst the flat revenues is the size of the cost increases that I'll touch on a little bit more. But you can see here, if we were talking if just about revenue, we'd be talking around mostly flat, just about 0.5% down from a revenue perspective. But actually, from a profitability perspective, 4% down is a real difficult picture for us. Now, if you look across what's happened in the UK over the last kind of year or so, so starting with Q1, the good thing about splitting this is I did in the last presentation, if anyone saw it, really splitting those changes that happened from a payroll point of view. So if the national insurance changes and national living wage changes that happened in April, if you split Q1 and Q2, of course, you can see the impact both sides of that. And actually, overall, the impact on profitability was fairly limited as between those 2 points in time. Because you can see there Q1 was at around 4% or 3.8% up in labour costs, and Q2 was at around 4.3% up in labour costs. So the size of the change we were expecting wasn't as dramatic between those two periods. However, if you combine the two of them at a point in time where revenues have been going south, of course, a real challenge for profitability. And if you look at the year-to-date picture there in the bottom right, that 4.2% down is almost all related to the fact that revenues are flat and labour costs have increased by that amount. The good positive, I guess, if I can throw anything in there, is that July was a strong month, as you could see there. And actually, I've just looked at the numbers hot off the press for August, where we saw 0.5% growth in TrevPAR and 0.5% down from a profitability perspective. So not really impacted the year-to-date position that much, but still much more positive than Q1 and Q2. If you look across the UK, so the real impact here, or in fact, I should explain the diagram. So those on the right-hand side of the chart have seen a growth in TrevPAR, and those at the top half have seen the growth in profitability margin. And really, you can see that most markets across the UK are in a position where basically we've lost profitability and also TrevPAR. A handful of markets there have actually seen growth. So Nottingham, Liverpool, Newcastle, and I'm proud to say my hometown Cardiff, with some huge events across the city over the last 7 or 8 months. And the real challenges there, as you can see, Bournemouth, Belfast, Edinburgh, Manchester really been quite impacted year to date. Now, if we split between kind of provincial UK and London, we have a few stories in these numbers. So, the first thing I would highlight is that if you look on the left-hand side of the chart, these are the departmental profitabilities. So, rooms profit is now below 65% on average across the UK for provincial hotels. Food and beverage at 27.7% there. Further drop versus last year, and this is after losing almost 10 percentage points versus pre-COVID. So, this is food and beverage continues to be a challenge, albeit, as you'll see in a moment, provincial UK is sitting much better than London when it comes to that area. Profitability overall dropped by around 0.7 percentage points versus last year. And if you look on the right-hand side there, you can see the impact over time. So how that has basically moved versus where we were pre-COVID. So 31.5% now down to 28.3%. So 3 percentage points drop just over that versus where we were pre-COVID. If we look at London in a bit more detail, well, what you can see here on the right-hand side is that, the profitability drop is more extreme versus pre-COVID. But actually, I'd probably point your attention towards the food and beverage margins there, which have really been impacted in London. Now just sat around 20% on an average point of view. Of course, there will be those hotels that are doing much worse than that. But the real thing in London is, of course, still driving very high rooms profit, as you can see there on the left-hand side, so 75%, so around 10 percentage points better than what we see in the provinces, and that is driving much better profit margin overall for hotels, and of course, propping up that food and beverage performance. If you look across the UK, well, the average here is, the real challenges are still in food and beverage, very similar picture to what you saw in the mix of the previous two slides, and overall profitability, although it increased between 23 and 24, it's dropped back off now on the rolling 12 in 25 at 36%, as you can see there. Now, the real challenge, I highlighted this in the last slide deck, but I think it's really, I mean, this is basically going to be the main topic of discussion, I think, for today. So TrevPAR since January has been mostly flat, as we showed on the previous slides. What this is looking at is the monthly movement in the 12-month average. So I won't go into the detail on why we do that, but it's just to kind of really show, how things are moving from month to month rather than just looking at year to year. And what you can see here is that basically labour costs have been, increasing at a fairly steady rate this year, and the total revenues have been basically flat. So that's what's causing this divide in terms of profit margin. Now you can see it if you look at it stacked up. I won't spend too long on this slide because it basically tells the same story, but the issue hasn't really been around cost of sales, so booking costs in particular. It hasn't really been around the expense lines. The real challenge has actually been, around the labour costs, and that's really where we should be honing in our attention for today. And of course, the fact that the revenues have been flat or somewhat negative this year. Now, if I split the labour costs, because I think this is quite an interesting slide overall, that you can see that, for instance, I would have expected, and I think most of us predicted, that rooms and food and beverage would be the most impacted by the changes to national living wage and national insurance costs. And actually, as you can see from the left-hand side there, food and beverage was the least impacted department overall. Having spoken to operators this week at the conference in Manchester, there was a lot of discussion around the fact that food and beverage was very much the targeted area when it came to cost-saving measures, and therefore I think this is why we've seen less of an impact maybe in food and beverage. Again, good one to talk to Paul about. But the big impacts are actually been in the other department, which is mostly related to spa treatments and health club staffing, and property and maintenance, as you can see there on the bottom right. Overall, showing that picture, as I spoke about earlier, the 1.2 percentage point drop in GOP margin is almost directly linked to the 1.4 percentage point increase in the labour margin. Further in the P&L, so you can see the TrevPAR line there at negative 0.8 year to date. Other than utility costs, we haven't managed to see the savings across the cost line. So although the expense lines have slowed, and the utility cost saving has mostly offset the increase we've seen in other areas, overall, we haven't. We would have seen further erosion in the margin related to this, albeit it's much smaller than the challenge of labour costs. And the impact that's had across the board. So I've got my final two slides here. If we look at the hotel types, you'll be tired of me saying the golf resorts continue to thrive. We've seen further success in that over the rolling 12, so 7.6% up in profit per available room. You see there conversely on the focused service hotels where we're looking at 6.2 percentage point drop. And that, of course, is a real area for us to focus in some of the conversation today. And then if you go on to the final slide here, where you can see the mix of the brand scales. So we split ultra luxury and luxury. You can see on the left-hand side, there's a really good reason why we do that. Impacted very differently. What I will say is the ultra luxury sample is very much honed in on London, where most of the ultra luxury hotels in the UK are actually sat. And then the upper mid-scale segment, you can see there 5.7% down as well. We've seen slight upticks there in upper upscale, if I was going to hang on to a few positives in the numbers. And then there's one more slide. So just on the point of revenues, you've seen this one before. I think, again, an interesting topic here is that food and beverage conferencing continues to struggle. Rooms demand is slow, but there are these other levers that continue to be seemingly doing quite well in and outside of hotels. We've got that other area there where there are further services maybe coming to the forefront for us to upsell to guests. So overall, you can see revenues are flat, labour costs are the key challenge, golf revenues continue to grow. I will just read them out, but basically the same thing as I was kind of mentioned here. Energy costs have fallen, but much softer than what we've seen in the previous years. And my final point is Cardiff is awesome. Thank you.
Yes, Cardiff is awesome. That on that point, actually, Mike, why is Cardiff doing so well? You mentioned it was events. Is there a new venue, or were they just not very good the year before?
Well, no, there's just been some huge. I mean, Oasis did their opening nights, obviously in Cardiff, and although you wouldn't pin it on those kind of two nights, there is a absolutely dramatic impact of something like that happening in the city. Then I think even in this period, there's been, other music events, sporting events that have just happened at the Millennium Stadium in particular. So no, it's not necessarily all like driven just by Oasis, but the impact on the RevPAR, as you can
Yeah, rugby finals, things like that, all of those things came to Cardiff this time. So it's interesting, that June-July scenario, because June was softer this year, July was stronger, which, as Michael showed, and that was really about the events. Last year, Taylor Swift was June. This year, Oasis and Coldplay were July and August. And it sounds stupid, but that impacts a lot of those big citywide events, and can really skew 1 month data. Where Michael looks at it, is you look at those things, and actually, when you budget and when you think about those, and you're talking to owners, those things can skew very much. Right, cities. Edinburgh last year had a very, very strong citywide event, kind of pre the summer season. This year it's not been so strong, and all these things have massive play when it's the international and the real high end event kind of business when it happens. So Cardiff is awesome, you know that. But it was very much driven, but you could see it from what was happening, and it ripples out to places like Bristol and things like that, and you see that effect.
They just really see Cardiff top of the league, right? So they're just taking advantage of it.
And a question here about Poland, who were top of the pile, weren't they, for profits for this year? Is there a reason for that, or is it something that they're doing differently, or again, is it just that they had a not such a great 2023?
I'd love to have the answers for everything, honestly.
Okay.
So Poland, so Eastern Europe in general, and like Poland sat on that border between kind of Central Europe and Eastern Europe, right? But those developing markets have, coming from a lower base, right? So there is, over the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen the kind of constant growth. Poland totally outperformed the markets around it. But of course, there was quite an impact from, the humanitarian rooms that were taken up by post the start of the war, etc. So there has been kind of a lot of ins and outs in the P&L. But yeah, to be honest with you, I haven't got the full reasoning for why Poland is doing as well as it is.
Okay, great, fantastic. So everywhere I go, I hear about national insurance costs and their massive unexpected leap with the national insurance threshold, and then that combined with the national living wage. We were expecting to see labour costs increase further than the already challenging results. Have you got any feedback on that? Are we able to see the full impact already, or how have operators managed to offset those costs? Maybe that's one for Paul to dive in with.
Yeah, sorry,
Oh,
Paul, just before you jump in there, because I think the one thing is just to add to that as well. I did look at the data in time for the conference this week, and I think I even sent it over to Paul as well. There's the national living wage section of the P&L. We saw 35% in the department, up to 50% increase in national insurance costs, right? So that's like, if we just look at national insurance on its own, we did see the 35 to 50%. But yeah, the impact on the actual P&L overall, Paul could definitely talk to better than me, because I think it's a sign that operators really reacted to the challenges.
yeah, I think there's two things. When you look quarter to quarter, you've got to remember there was a higher increase in national living wage in the previous budget than there was in this budget. So you've always got this lag that you look in a calendar year, but you can't look at it as we're all budgeting now for 2026. You've got to remember you've got a quarter of this uplift still to come. So you've still got the first quarter of 2026 is the tail of the 25 budget, because the things like national insurance, etc., doesn't actually kick in to that January to March in next year. So you've got a budget for that. So the 2025 first quarter is actually affected by what was actually put in place in April 2024. So that 3 to 3 kind of flow because it was actually a higher living wage increase than it was this year. But obviously, so you've got that effect. But I think the key thing with all of this is, yeah, were we all absolutely hand in heads coming mid-November last year going, oh my God, what the hell are we going to do? What does this cost us? And the numbers are exponential. I mean, we're talking millions onto businesses. And you're sitting with owners and going, okay, we've just given you a budget, and by the way, we've just been hit with a £1.5 million payroll increase. We need to react. Because for any owner, the immediate thing is, okay, well, what can you do? And I think it's a kind of not just a payroll. It's very easy to say, right, what do we do about payroll? But there's only so far you can go with the standards you've got to operate, the level and the payroll, especially when you've got overseas owners that don't really get living wage and don't get these things. And they kind of, well, can we not do it? And it's like, no, you legally have to follow this on this date. So you have to go through an explanation on that. The way we addressed it was probably the same as most people. Immediately, you put a recruitment freeze in. You go, okay, look, no one else can join, and we've got to work through where do we go? What is the staffing level we can afford? But the other side of what we did was, look, we're not going to be able to recover this purely through payroll efficiencies and payroll initiatives and, that side of it. So it's like, literally went through the whole P&L, and we set up a project, and we just went through every single cost we have in the P&L and just said, well, what can we do? And if we can save, £1 per occupied room here, if we can look at what we're doing elsewhere, is it justified to have this contract? And literally went through, and we took every one of the senior team took projects and reported back and said, right, what can we do? What is the options available? So we knew our increase was X, and it's how do we mitigate that through the P&L, focusing on the EBITDA rather than focusing purely on payroll, and say, well, okay, payroll, we can do what we can do, but actually, what is it? And got every general manager throughout the business and said, look, there is no stupid answer to this. We won't see it. We're sitting looking at stuff, looking at your P&L, but actually, what would you come up with any idea? And nothing is stupid, and we'll discuss them all. Yeah, some of them were wacky and some of them were a bit challenging, and you've got to look at it and go, okay, maybe we can't do that. There is a Brown compliance, or there's legal compliance to what we can and cannot do. But we literally just opened it up, and we put teams together with the GMs, with the regional teams and everybody, and actually reported fully on that, and actually said, look, come on, what can we do? Where can we do it? And actually, and it wasn't as good. I mean, when we were in COVID, the brands very much were like, look, brand standards, forget them. You just got to survive. So but there's still been an element where they understand that maybe, some of the less key deliverables we could be a bit more flexible on. So they've understood that, and that helps. And I think it's actually about, you can either go, we're knackered, there's nothing we can do, or you take the view of, actually, okay, what if, and if that person's leaving, is there another option you can do in the business? What could you replace? Or could we look at certain things and say, well, actually, how can we help each other in this? And I think that's the route. And I think that's why you're seeing food and beverage as an obvious one. People have looked at timings of outlets. Do they need to be open as long? Do they need to be open every day? I mean, we walk down the high street, you want to eat out on a Monday night or a Tuesday night, and so many restaurants are now don't open till the latter part of the week. They've just shut, or they won't open on a Sunday night. And that's the same thing. It's like, well, okay, we've just got to bring our team to a level where we've got our A team and we can service our guests. But actually, we can't afford to have these low occupancy periods when we're running a full restaurant, we're running a full team. And retail food and beverage has been on that for a while, and hotels are catching up. And it's like, well, okay, maybe the bar and a bigger bar menu is acceptable on that evening than having a bar and a restaurant open, because the occupancy is not that level or whatever. And so again, what can you do that doesn't impact the customer overall, but you look at it and go, well, actually, we can't really, do we need to keep the bar open till 3 a.m? Can we look at actually when can the bar shut? What is actually, by looking at stats and everything, how many people actually drink after this time, to how much your staffing is, actually, can we save that hour or two here? Can we save that hour or two? And I think the industry has really grasped this and taken it really well and taken the challenge. Listen, we can all say we're the most victimized industry, and I think we can see it in every stat that's been published. 100,000 people less employed in our industry, that pre-budget, post-budget, tells you a story. Okay, we like it or not. But at the end of the day, owners have to look and say, we've still got the cost, we've still got to pay our interest, we've still got to pay our what's happening, what can we do? And it's difficult conversations, but if you're proactive and you've thought about it and you take them on that journey, then they will also look at things and go, okay, maybe we do need to give you some capex to be innovative this way, or to put some further innovation in to reduce the cost of energy, the cost of labor, the cost of servicing the guest. And I think that's the thing that has happened, is everyone's had to challenge what they did pre to what they do now. And we've got another massive, budget coming up next that's going to be as frightening as the one we've just gone through.
Well, let's hope not. But yes, there is that worry, definitely.
It is,
so lots there about cost savings, which is great. And I'm sure people will cling on to those. What about trying to drive new revenues? I was at the Institute of Chartered Accountants yesterday in a group that I sit on with hospitality people, and they were talking about things like maybe just pivoting your point of sale, one's point of sale offering. And you've talked about closing, on a Sunday night or even at the beginning of the week. What about things like introducing maybe more takeaway stuff? Is that something that you think would be worth considering? Maybe not beyond your hotels. In your hotels, obviously, would be a nice, easy answer. But do you think that's a realistic option? Because, of course, probably by doing that, you're increasing your staffing. So it's a difficult balance.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got to look at the individual businesses and how you do it. I mean, I've been on a podcast with you before, and we talked about literally shutting our restaurant for post-breakfast in one of our hotels, and we have Deliveroo. So we have a high street food coffee bar that you can have your lunch and your drinks and everything in our hotel. And then in the evening, we do Deliveroo and we do bar service. So there's so many ways you can do it. And there is a number of people have dark kitchens where you've got the kitchen in a hotel, and you could either lease it out to an operator as a dark kitchen, or you could operate somewhat of a dark kitchen that can provide food, etc. through. You've just got to cost it properly and understand, what is the utility cost, what's your staffing cost, delivery cost, etc. And if it works, and then you're in an environment it can work, brilliant. But also sometimes you've got to look at it and go, well, actually, what is the real cost of me operating that? And where do you break even? And it's the same as anything, isn't it? You're looking at leisure clubs, you're looking at everything. Where do you break even? How much membership do you need? What can you get per square foot in terms of income? So I think, yes, absolutely. And we've had a number of approaches at different times looking at some of that dark kitchen operation. And it can work, and certainly further afield outside the UK, it does work, and it works well. But I think it's each you've got to look at your individual businesses and say, well, actually, hold it. What are we doing with this space? How do we use it? A lot of hotels have got a lot of dead space that's not public space, that's behind the scenes, and how can you reuse that better? How can you get an income from it in various different ways? So I think that does work. But it's that innovative. You can either say it's going to stay empty forever, or what do you do with that space?
Yeah.
And challenge that. And you can see that in what Michael was saying before, where you're seeing the other areas, the non-core hotel areas, are actually growing, and there is demand in that market for a number of those areas.
Sticking on food and beverage, I remember during COVID, Michael and I did a live presentation actually for our conference that we were broadcasting. And I said, there's got to be something positive. And Michael very kindly said, yes, room service is up. I thought, yes, okay, that's a great one. We've got a question here about room service, and it's quite a loaded question. I'll read it word for word. Is 24-hour room service with losses and customers ordering a costly dinosaur? So I think we know his view on that. Would you agree with that as well? And well, Paul, and then Mike, have you seen that in the figures as well?
From my point of view, I think you've got to look at the service level for the hotel. At the end of the day, there is certain brands, there's certain operations you run where room service doesn't make sense. And actually, you've got to look at that sensibly, and there's no reason. And a number of times the food is available, but you'll go and collect it because it doesn't work otherwise. So I think you've just got to look at what you can deliver and not be all things to all men. Absolutely in other brands and other operations, why are you going to let someone come in with a Deliveroo option and take the pizza to a room when you can do it yourself and take the profit. I mean, you just got to look at your business case and how it works and to what's right and what the customer expectation is. And that's the thing, is that depending as you go up, as your service offering has to improve, it has to move further forward, then a customer is expecting that. And you might be selling a room slightly cheaper. And we did through COVID, we did through 9/11, where you're selling a room in London at prices that were way below what you normally would, but your room service and your mini bar and everything, just no one could afford it. So you've got to match what the customer's expectation is to what you're offering. Otherwise, they will go somewhere that will do it. So I don't think you can simply say, get rid of room service. But I think there is a place and there's a customer expectation, and you've got to work out the best way for you to deliver that.
Cool. Michael, have you got anything to add on room service stats, or should we? I've got quite a lot of questions here, but have you got anything you want to add specifically on room service?
So room service since 2019, we saw that kind of peak during COVID for the obvious reasons. You saw different countries or different regions react very differently. So, like for instance, because the challenge around costs and break even, a lot of UK hotels, for instance, stopped doing it. The US was again very similar. The Middle East went double down on it. So you had they really went into how they could deliver room service in a kind of full, sitting in a restaurant style. And again, the manning is different, the challenges are different, but the results were incredible. We saw like up to 80% increase in Middle East hotels during COVID in room service revenues. Now, that's all kind of come back down and settled. So in the UK right now, for instance, we're almost flat with where we were in 2019. Food is slightly up, beverage is literally bang on where we were per occupied room. So, I think room service is always, it's one of those, is a handful of things that we've just not really innovated or nailed. I don't think like the idea of the offering is there, right? If you stay in a hotel, many people don't want to sit on their own in an all-day dining restaurant. They're probably more likely to go out. But if you give them a good room service offering, then maybe, there is potential in it. Now that could be outsourcing it to third parties and taking a cut. I tell you, in the US, what I find amazing is I could stay at many of the big brands even. You click the QR code in the room to book your room service, and it comes, but it actually isn't delivered by the hotel staff. It's delivered by they've done a deal with an external restaurant that actually kind of provides all this. So they have their kitchen, they have their service and stuff, but the actual restaurant or the service doesn't come directly from the hotel. You're paying someone else without like really knowing about it. Until something goes wrong. But there is I think there's way more creative ways, and it's a revenue opportunity. At the end of the day, like as Paul was saying about the kind of, looking at the bar, do we need the bar open until 3 a.m.? It's, it's a pain, it's a cost, all these kind of things. Well, if you've got the stats and you can do the analysis on it, it might still be making you money, right? If those staff are going to cost you, an extra like 50 quid or whatever it is to keep them on, but you can make, a couple of hundred from a top line point of view, it is still a good thing to do. And the customers actually want it because that's why they're sat there. So I think it's a bit dangerous that we just kind of curtail all of the services and go, it's kind of like a race to the bottom, right? We end up just continually cutting the services and almost forcing ourselves into a position where we're seeing deteriorating revenues. And for me, that the challenge is going to be the balance in the both, right? It's like, can we find innovative ways to drive revenues and continue to relook and assess our cost base together, rather than just this idea that we just cut costs and save ourselves a bit of margin, but continue to lose profit into the bank because a 50% margin still wouldn't be worth very much if you've got half your trev part, right? So.
Absolutely. So you mentioned QR codes there, and I've seen a lot more QR codes over the last few years. I thought they were dead, and then they came back with a vengeance in during the pandemic. The point here is, why don't hotels look at digital ordering and offer QR codes in places around your hotel that are unmanned? I think that is happening, but there's probably a lot of opportunity to increase that. You can reduce resources, free up staff time, and drive order volumes. Plus, give guests a convenient means of ordering F&B wherever they are. And I think you've kind of already answered that one by saying they're doing it in the States and it comes down to the standards within your hotel. That'll work for some and not work for others. But I know that when I go to a pub, say, and if I can order from the table, I'll absolutely take that opportunity and order it. And I love it, but I know that some people get offended by it and think that we're
So
losing
I
personal
I
touch.
heard someone talk about this recently, right? It's a weird analogy, but it kind of works. You remember when they first put self-service checkouts in supermarkets? And like we were all kind of like, no, like why are we going to do this ourselves? Like this is ridiculous, right? And then you realize that it's way more efficient for you, right? Personally, it works for you. And I don't know about you, but every time I'm in a supermarket now, I go straight to the self-serve, right? I very rarely go to the manned checkout. So I find like it's a bit like that with the QR code thing, right? It's like we kind of put it in hotels. It's a bit weird because you kind of go, well, service is actually the thing. But is service the order taking and the collection of the payment? Because I don't think we're very good at the latter for sure. Um, but what it really is when you deliver the food, right? When you deliver the service to the customer, whatever that service is, if you nail that bit of it, that's what people are there for. So I think the QR code thing is a good example of the kind of things hotels kind of dip their toes into, and then revert it back to the old ways. And this is for me, if I was going to rant about something that I'm frustrated about, I sit on these panels with some commercial leaders even, and we talk about like what do we do when we're in a situation like this, flat demand, challenge around like how we're going to continue to drive top line because the costs are a real challenge for us. And a lot of the solutions that they come to are standard, like things we were talking about 20 years ago, almost like, we need to double down on the basics. We need to kind of say, no, we need to get creative, right? We need to start doing things like the airlines have had to do, like the retail's had to do, we have to just get better at the stuff that we've not been good at, not like revert back to the things that we did, over the years ago and get the same results, right?
And on that sort of technology topic, to what extent, this is from one of our listeners today, to what extent do you think technology and data can realistically transform profitability in the sector? And where do you see the most immediate wins? I mean, I'm coming across it all the time now with robotic process automation to get rid of some of the more mundane tasks. That feels like I've said that 100 times in the last month. But do you think there are quick wins to be had through technology? Paul, maybe that's a good one for you.
Yeah, no, I do, and we've touched on it before about the brand scenario sometimes holding back and not being as quick to adapt to where non-branded businesses are. But I think data is absolutely key. If you're looking at your costs, everyone will say, "Oh, rota management," and all of. But it is about you've got a limited resource and you've got to put it in front in the right place at the right time. So the more you can use that data and you can predict when things are happening, the better chance you've got of delivering the service and being efficient. But also when you're looking at, the amount of stuff we do with energy in terms of that, looking at energy and what's actually being consumed and how can we mitigate that. Very technology driven, really driven by technology. But then also the benchmarking and Michael and I talk about this a lot of time when we want to be looking at markets we're going in we know nothing about, or we're looking at trying to compare why is X happening here and it's not happening somewhere else. And the only thing is, if you've got clean data, you can start analyzing it and start questioning it. And there's a project we're working on between us at the moment is all about proving that the efficiency we believe we're achieving, we are achieving. You can't do that without clean data, and that's the part where we've got to work, because then it's no, we're not as good as we think we are. Okay, let's get involved in that. Let's get the right people in a room and say, why is it that this is happening when it shouldn't be? But if your data's not clean and you can't actually analyze it properly, it is a problem. So 100%, I think, and actually having a team that think about that all the time and are looking at it is key, because if not, everyone, you think you're doing a good job, but are you?
Yeah,
And
you've got
that's
to be
the
able to.
challenge, and that's Michael's lifeblood is that part of telling us we're always bad and we could do better.
Yeah, and measuring it, obviously, as you say, it's key, and we can't do that without good data.
Yeah.
So a question here about, we've talked a lot about service. How, Mike, this is probably one for you to start with. So we've got ultra luxury, we've got our mid-scale, we've got our luxury, we've got our budget. I was told yesterday by some experts in the industry that the ultra luxury are still doing very well and the budgets are doing very well. And as I've heard probably throughout my career, it's that middle that's getting the squeeze. Are the figures backing that up as well with your upper mid-scale ultra luxury doing well?
Well, I think you can get mixed up in the ultra luxury one in particular. Like the amount of supply that's gone into London in particular and is still entering London in that space. I think everybody is surprised with how well ultra luxury hotels continue to perform, right? It's like we would have expected a much bigger dent in a fairly small segment, right? Like a quite a concentrated segment. There is, the performance has continued to be pretty strong. We've seen, all that additional supply has not impacted RevPAR or top line as much as we kind of anticipated it would. But if you look at the profitability, if you look at like the impact on the bottom line, I think one thing to consider in this balance is always like if you're in an ultra luxury hotel, generally you're going to have quite a big cost base. And therefore, you have more levers to pull. You have more kind of meat on the bone to be able to kind of, make it leaner and find areas of opportunity in the cost lines in difficult times. But you are also burdened by, and you are also exposed by a lot of the headwinds. Um, so that is, I think, the main story of the ultra luxury segment. If you can continue to drive, the top line, and there's obviously an expectation of service, etc., then you've got many more levers to kind of pull, and people are going to spend lots more on property in lots of different areas, but you are exposed to costs. I think conversely, if you look at the focus service segment, that was the other one that was kind of mainly impacted there. It's almost the opposite end of the story, right? It's like you have very few levers to pull from a revenue perspective. You have a much smaller cost base, but because of that, when times are hard, trying to strip out, labor costs and, those kind of expense lines when you have a very lean model, um, is really difficult. There's a harsh reality to that. So that's the kind of they're not the same story. They're both impacted in very different ways, but actually the what we would say is kind of the middle segments are actually seeing the uptick year on year. They've been the areas that have actually seen, a bit more uptick. There's obviously a challenge in the economy segment, or in the kind of up to mid-scale segment. And then on the right-hand side, those ultra luxury hotels, of course, being massively impacted for different reasons.
And if we just quickly touch on meetings and events, I know that some hotels have got rid of a lot of their meetings and events and switched them into bedrooms, which it's difficult to probably the quick win on that is probably quite obvious. But what are you seeing on meetings and events, Mike? I know that we've got somebody you work with who does that for a living with venue performance. But what are you seeing on meetings and events? Is that something that's growing, staying stagnant, or going in the opposite direction?
So throughout the year, it's improved. So, I mean, the year-to-date position is 1.8% back. Sorry, 1%, 1.8% up on last year, right? So we've seen like mild growth in comparison to the other ancillary revenues. But yeah, it continues to be an area. Food and beverage in general is a real challenge. And again, I suspect that repurposing some of those areas of the building can have pros and cons, right? There's like if you can drive meetings demand and you can find other segments within that space, I think that is much more advantageous than repurposing immediately. But I think flexible space has been the kind of topic of this year, right? It's like, can you use that same space for five different things? I think that has been a really interesting one. And yeah, Peter and the team of Venue Performance are able to kind of segment that in a way where you can kind of see where the opportunities are from one end, and see where the kind of challenges are on the other end, maybe repurpose the space for different, target different audiences, for instance.
Yes, as I always thought that, again, I keep mentioning the pandemic, but post-pandemic, because the smaller meetings, we're all so used to doing things online now, but I thought they were being replaced with people who didn't have offices coming together and meeting once a week, once a month, whatever it might be. Paul, what are you seeing in your hotels with meetings and events?
Yeah, well, actually, so very much there is a good demand for the small meetings, and they are the regional get-togethers. A lot of people work from home now, so you've got to think that part of major offices, a number of companies have reduced their office space, so that means there is that point of getting people together, and it's definitely happening. There is still quite a bit of training going on, as well, and you're seeing that, and so you're seeing those kind of training events and those kind of series happening. Um, there's no doubt that there is the big events happening, but the numbers aren't as strong. If you actually look at some of these really big conference centers and these big exhibition centers, actually their numbers are slightly less. So you're seeing these events happening, but and that probably is just the economy where people are going, we used to send 6, we're sending 3 people, or maybe we skip this one, not that one. So you're seeing that happening. So some of the really big citywide events and things like that, maybe the numbers aren't as strong, and you're seeing that into the market. But there is the actual demand for meetings, etc., is still around, and I think that's corporate demand, regardless of where it goes, whether it's into meetings, where it's into rooms, has held up very, very well. It's the leisure demand, leisure rate that you're seeing, and that discretionary, and again into meetings and events, those kind of numbers you're seeing, the softness, and that's economy. That's just people having to cut their cloth and manage that through. So that's why you're seeing food and beverage being a challenge. And that's why you're seeing, when you look at the market and you actually look at those elements between the corporate and the leisure, you're seeing that the difference between that kind of market. There is there's still buoyant corporate demand, corporate travel, everything, leisure, much more discretionary. Maybe a 3-night ends up a 2-night stay. Maybe pricing isn't as strong, etc. And without any macro environment, that's just what's happening in the micro market. And then obviously, when you look around the world, some of the tariffs and some things like that have really hit into some of those markets where people just aren't traveling. And then that feeds into the UK, and sometimes where the travel is being affected internationally coming in because of some of the things that are not in our control.
Yes, and I think the Americans are being put off coming to London because with our Sharia law, apparently, that we're implementing. And also fear around mobile phone theft seems to be such a big thing if you're not in London. I think mostly from overseas, but also from the provinces. I think there's this fear, isn't there, of visiting. But there we go. Now, Michael, I did ask you not to do a sales pitch, but I'm just going to give you a quick little opportunity to talk about Profit Finder, because that has been the theme of the discussion today, is finding cost savings and finding more profit. Do you just want to give us a really short little snippet of what this is that you've got available
Yeah,
now?
sure. So we've officially launched it this month with the reporting. It's already in the hands of like 5 or 6 operators now. Where the tool itself is designed to basically go through, instead of us just delivering you the data, this tells you where in the P&L you have the opportunities across your portfolio. So it basically categorize, like I did for the markets, it'll categorize the hotels based on where they are versus the competition. Tell you where to look in the P&L, quantify the value that's on the table. So from an asset management perspective, that's basically the target audience originally for it, but of course useful for operations. But more importantly, then it allows you then to set targets using indexing, and then kind of track the output of it on the other side. We've thrown in a few extra features which were kind of required for a while now, so you can now rank where you can find where you rank within each KPI across the suite, so you can see not just where you sit versus the competition, but where in the comp set you are. And then you do the customizable dashboards and able to kind of merge different couple of lines together on the P&L, etc. So yeah, really exciting for us to finally get out. It's taken 2 years, to be honest, and it's been quite some time in the making, but delivering it at this moment in time where, of course, the kind of complexity in the hotel operation and the opportunities is so diverse. But I think this perfect time for us to get it out. So yeah, get in touch if anyone wants to learn more about it.
Brilliant, thank you. Actually, we have no more open questions from our delegates, so they must be fully satisfied with the data. So
More
thank you
sleeping, yeah.
updating us so clearly with all the useful data. And thank you, Paul. Your knowledge from working so closely with hotels and investors is really valuable. So thank you very much for sharing that too. As always, to all of our listeners today, if you need formal advice or data specific to your property, then please approach your professional advisors or come to me at HOSPA for a referral. And as Mike said, if you'd like an introduction directly to him or to HotStats or to Paul at Valor Hospitality, then please let me know if you don't already know them, and I will happily connect you. And please all take a look at hospa.org for our other upcoming events. We'll be at the Independent Hotel Show next week. We're at the Business Solutions Bar on the second floor, the first floor up the stairs. And just to remind you, we've got our great green balloon debate on the 16th of October at the Amelia White House in London, which is so full. Last year's Anything to Go By, full of invaluable insights on how to save the planet. So wherever you are on your sustainability journey, please do come along to that one. And then, of course, HOSPACE. Mike will be on stage. Paul will be there cheering us on, hopefully. Our annual conference. Please secure your ticket as soon as you can. It's 13th of November at the Royal Lancaster in London. On the website, you'll find recordings of all of our webinars and masterclasses, and they will also be on our YouTube channel. And today's will be uploaded hopefully within the next few days, probably the beginning of next week, realistically. But thank you all for listening. And thanks again, Mike and Paul. It was really invaluable information. Thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Bye.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.